Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button and I'm a granite sculptor. I'm gonna do a few videos about casting models from Clay Maquettes, and I've got a number of models here. Usually when I do a model and actually point it or measure it precisely to enlarge it or reduce it or duplicate it precisely into stone, I have to do the model and then the clay, and then I immediately cast it. These are all clay sketches that I did for direct carve jobs, which means I just did the clay, like this clay of St. Francis with a dove. It's supposed to be lighting in his hands. And then got a clay of the iris and hummingbird, tulips, then on the tulip bevel, the daffodils, which are in a really deep vat. It's on 2x4, so it's 2.5 inch deep, so they're really sunken down. But and then I've got a little bit of drapery we did. That's very short relief. This is maybe an inch in profile, inch and a half. Wasn't very tall, and that I did on a draped cross. And then I've got an Ekahomo, which had a man that very typical project. And this one, the top of his head, he didn't really have any brains. His head's a little small, but I carved it in an open niche. This was a sketch model, mainly for composition of the face, because these are high points on the job, the brow and the tip of the nose and some of that stuff. So because these weren't a big priority to cast them right away, I didn't flyer it into them and cast them like I normally do. So they've been sort of accruing, been hanging around the studio, been to a bunch of shows, and but now it's time to get this clay back in the bucket. Got a big angel to do, and just need to free up materials because I've got a lot of bats and clay and everything all tied up in these models. So I have to go through and touch up around the edge here where you can see it's starting to delaminate or crack a little bit, and there's a crack here across his waist. I'll have to fix all that. I'm going to try to do a series of videos to do some different versions or different methods of what I was taught, what I was trained to do, and what I figured out along the way. Modeling materials are very expensive. Buying the expensive silicone products that most companies would have you use are in the $100 a gallon range. Different companies, whether it's Silicone Inc. or Smooth On or whoever's products you use, a lot of them would just have you pour this full. That's really expensive. This work is just like anything else. There isn't a bunch of free money floating around. So you have to figure out a way to make it work. So I think what I'm going to do is going to do a demonstration of a waste mold on this model, just because it's very little undercut. It's very simple waste mold. I'll put plaster on here directly with a guide coat that I'll tint or color, and then I'll pull this off. Then I'll back it up with heavier plaster. Then I'll pull this off. I'll pull the clay out, and then you literally waste the mold away with. You'll carve it away with chisels. You'll chisel it away, and this will break out pretty fast. You can do a waste mold for any of these. It's a single shot deal because you'll destroy the model in the process, or the clay in the process. So you got to do it right. When you do something more elaborate like these, and waste molds was what I was taught to do in the studio in Vermont. Angelo Ambrosini taught me about waste molds. So did Giuliano, and they work well, but when you're doing something ornate, it's a lot of work to carve it off until you start finding the figure, and it's not my favorite way to do it. For this larger project, this is a 4-foot niche. I'll probably do a plain hardware store silicone mold. And this is something I was taught by a friend that started carving there at the studio with me in Barrie. After I'd been there for a year or two, Ryan came and he showed us how they had done cheap castings, cheap molds down at the foundry in Arkansas with just silicone from the hardware store that's manipulated with your finger, and you just literally mold it around. Works really well. The problem with that is the regular hardware store silicone is meant to bind really well, very tenacious, and it sticks to everything. So we'll release this with some soap and do that. It'll make a mold that you can use a number of times. Works pretty well. For these more involved projects, we're going to use a combination of the expensive $100 a gallon product that'll pour a thin coat. It registers well. It'll get a really perfect cast. And I'll move the model around to manipulate to get just an even coat. Then instead of filling the whole thing with that, I'll go through and back it up with the hardware store silicone that I can open a tube at a time. It isn't as cheap as it used to be, but you've got a good control over it. And then with both of those methods, I'll go through and we'll resolve draft or undercut with foam and that's embedded in the silicone. It takes a few days to build your mold, to do it right. I understand that other companies or like the foundry that I work with, they do a different process. This works for me, and this is cost effective for me. So because we're not reproducing this exact surface as much as we are this exact form or shape, because I'm going to carve this in stone. There's going to be some translation, and there's going to be minor differences. So I'm not going to have the sweeps of my fingers or the tools directly from this in the final product unless I carve them. So this explanation is meant to be an introduction to these few videos, or probably at least 3 videos. And depending on how we can do it, it may even be more than that. So, but there'll be videos of doing waste mold, to do a cheap, just a hardware store silicone tube mold, and then a hybrid with the flowable 2-part silicone and the hybrid all back with the mother. So, and then we'll get into the different materials as well, whether it's regular plaster, whether it's hydrocal, whether it's dental stone, and depending on what you've got access to, what your plans are, and what we're casting. So stay tuned. We'll keep working on these. Just this explanation's, taking a few minutes, so we'll start the next video fresh, probably with a waste mold. But this is the first of the series of casting plaster models from Clay Maquettes here at Carolina Sculpture Studio. Once again, my name is Clint Button here at Carolina Sculpture Studio. Thanks for stopping by.